In 1999, Helen Zuman graduated from Harvard University and began dreaming of finding what is known as an intentional community, where like-minded people live communally and off the land. Having received a grant to travel and research different communities, she hit the road, stopping in Arizona, Oregon, and California. But when she learned about Zendik Farm, which was then located in western North Carolina, she thought it sounded most like what she was looking for and made the trip from her home state of New York. She stayed for 5 years, and when she left, she realized the utopia she had been seeking was really being operated as a cult. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day, but all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. Episode 139, an interview with Helen Zuman and her experience with the Neo-Hippie cult Zendik Farm in North Carolina. In the late 1960s, an artist, musician, and poet named Wolf Zendik founded an intentional community of artists and craftspeople alongside his wife, Errol. The community moved several times throughout the years, stopping in California, Florida, Texas, North Carolina, and West Virginia. They were known for promoting their beliefs through music CDs, literature, and merchandise. Their catchphrase was, "Stop bitching, start a revolution." Wolf Zendik passed away in June of 1999 before Helen Zuman joined the community, but his wife Errol took over as the leader, determined to keep the farm's mission going. Helen had just graduated from college when she discovered Zendik Farm and decided to visit the community and experience what it had to offer. We're excited to welcome her to the podcast today to share more about that experience and what it taught her. Helen Zuman, author and master etheric composter, specializes in turning the stinky gunk of experience into fertile, fragrant prose. In 2018, she published Mating in Captivity, a memoir of her 5 years post-Harvard at Zendik Farm, a neo-hippie cult with a radical take on sex and relationships. In 2023, she released an essay collection, What is a Sex Cult? How Cults Reveal Our Culture. Currently, she is composting her friendship with a man who died a murderer by crafting a crime novel, Miracle Cave. Born in London and raised in Brooklyn, Helen now villages in Black Mountain, North Carolina, with and without her wonderful husband, Greg. Visit helenzuman.com to learn more, get in touch, and sign up for her Substack, Shit I'm Not Supposed to Say. Hello, Helen, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Renee. Thank you for having me.
So let's just go ahead and get started. We've got a lot to talk about today. For any of our listeners who are not familiar with it, could you give us an overview of what Zendik Farm was?
Sure. So I call Zendik Farm a neo-hippie cult because it started in 1969, but unlike many groups from that era, it survived for 44 years until 2013. So it sort of brought that ethos, into the 21st century. So I'm calling it a cult. Some people call it a commune, and there were a lot of communal elements to it. People living very close to each other, not having their own money, kind of throwing in for the collective good. And also like the sort of underlying story of Zendik, the story that attracted a lot of people to it, and sort of its reason for being supposedly was to save the world from ecocide. Came out of the counterculture, the Back to the Land movement, a moment of severe, well, maybe more than a moment, a decade of severe ecological panic in the late 60s and 70s, where many people, many different groups were looking for solutions to the damage that humans were starting to realize we were causing to the planet. So the idea behind Zendik, sort of the cover story of Zendik, was that we were creating a new culture that was going to, be honest and cooperative and fulfill human beings to an extent that hadn't happened before and prevent us from destroying ourselves and each other.
So you graduated from Harvard University at age 22 and became interested in homesteading and organic farming. How did that lead you to Zendik Farm and what attracted you to it?
Yeah, so my last year of college, I lived in this off-campus dorm called the Dudley Co-op. It was sort of the place for Harvard kids who had a hard time with Harvard. And it was like home for misfits, off campus, on campus, home for misfits. And we there was a lot more collective activity there than was found in the regular dorm situation. We cooked for ourselves, cleaned for ourselves, bought our own food, stuff like that. And for the first time when I was living there, I really felt like I belonged. I felt like the weird person I was actually fit in this situation. And so, and I wondered after I left school, was there a place I could go that would be like this, wouldn't except that it would last longer. It wouldn't just be this limited time, college situation. And so I got a book called The Communities Directory, and I looked through it. I received a grant through Harvard to go traveling and explore intentional communities, which is what I set out to do. My first summer after college, I did explore a bunch of different places. None of them really stuck with me. And then I found Zendik Farm I had started with the A's, was very methodical, and then I was like, screw the A's, I'm going for the Z's. Then I found Zendik, and I was attracted by some of the things in the listing and on the website. They said they had a very large concentration of young people. They were into farming and the arts, and I had concentrated in visual art in college, and I was interested in writing, and I really wanted to learn about the practicalities of, food and water and shelter and all of that, but I didn't want to sacrifice my artistic or intellectual self. So this seemed like a really good fit. And so I got in a Greyhound bus from New York City and, showed up for a visit, figuring I would just stay for a couple weeks. And so as far as the attraction, I think part of the attraction was what I just said. Another part of it was something weirder and more mysterious. When I went to look at the website, this was in 1999, right? Very few communities even had websites. I had to go to the public library to look at this website. But the sense I got from the website was just this sort of mysterious romance about it. Like, I didn't really understand what was going on, but it was kind of out there. They were talking about starting a revolution, about how everyone was lying to each other all the time. I was like, yeah, exactly. That hits my alienation spot right where it is. And again, I think I felt like I had found another home for misfits like me. Graduating from Harvard, everyone is going off into professional school or banking or whatever, and I'm just like, no, that makes no sense to me. That was part of the attraction before I arrived, and then after I got there, I was really impressed by the people. That was one thing. They all seemed very confident and competent and really good at so many of the things I knew nothing about. I was used to being good at everything I tried for the most part. But I was totally out of my league in terms of homesteading and stuff like that. So that was very impressive. There were a lot of hot guys, not a minor point. And so there was that, though there were those attractions, and then this whole idea of having this mission and, possibly finding a chosen family I could be with for my entire life. And then those were sort of some of the pulls. And then there were maybe what I could call the pushes in terms of the ethos I was absorbing from day one of, the outside world is screwed. We are the only people with the answers. And if you don't join us, you are condemned to a life of misery in the death culture, which was our term for everybody else.
Yeah, I love the way you started out the book talking about what your story was and describing this idea of death culture that everyone talked about there and the core belief. Could you explain to our listeners a little bit about what that was?
Yeah, so we Zendiks believed that humanity was on an unconscious suicide mission. That humanity was trying to kill itself and was going to take the entire planet and all of life down with it. And we, Zendiks, on the other hand, were creating this new way of living that was going to do the opposite. So basically, anyone, anything that wasn't Zendik was on the opposite side of the line. And I mean, very clear, examples of that were just, mainstream food. On the farm, we ate almost entirely organic food, whole foods. We grew a large amount of our own food. You know, popular culture, music, television, movies, whatever, that was all part of the death culture. Not that we never partook, but we partook with the idea that this was sort of an addiction that we occasionally needed a fix of because we came out of this culture ourselves. And it was intimately linked with this idea of growing up in corruption. I remember a line from Wolf, one of the founders. He said of all of us that we were born in corruption and taught to be corrupt. So it wasn't just there are like bad things out there. It was also like the idea that from the time all of us were born, the air we breathed was polluted and suspect, and it was our project as Zendiks and world savers to root out this corruption and replace it with this new life-giving philosophy.
So what was an average day like at the farm then?
Yeah, so there were days at the farm and also days out on the street when we were out selling our magazines and music and t-shirts and stickers to make money. That was a different kind of day. But days on the farm, I mean, there was a fair amount of variation. It wasn't like we had a set program from dawn to dusk. The thing that was constant pretty much every day, at least for me, was kind of being on call from the time I got up till the time I went to sleep. So, and we lived rustically. We lived in the woods, not off the grid, but on a homestead. So get up, go outside in all weather to go to the outhouse because no indoor toilets, and have breakfast usually in the large communal kitchen, go out on some work crew, could be physical work, could be making lunch for 50 or 60 people. Often, sometimes at lunch we would have meetings, more work in the afternoon, dinner all together, sometimes some sort of a meeting after dinner. Impromptu meetings could happen at any time when Errol, the leader, decided that we need to talk about something. And then in the evening, sometimes there would be programs or things to do in the evening. And also the evening was the time when it was the time for going on, quote, dates. It was a time for sexual assignations. So if I had something like that lined up, then that's what I would be doing. But basically, again, just this theme of, I mean, I did sometimes take time, by myself to like write in my notebook or write on a computer in the office. And sometimes I had self-directed projects, or I was just in charge of a certain, set of tasks, and I would do them. But and I even went hiking sometimes, nearby. But the common theme was just, I did not feel okay about doing something of my own for myself because I wanted to.
Right. So Zendiks were expected to help support the cause by going on selling trips. What did these trips entail?
Yeah, so we went to music festivals, concerts, city streets all over the Northeast, the Southeast, sometimes even the Midwest. For example, Mardi Gras in New Orleans. That was the mother of all selling trips. We would go there. Well, I think my first year, in the year 2000, that was the first time I went to Mardi Gras. And this is a good example. It was overall, Zendiks were there for 7 days of the entire week, before Fat Tuesday. And And I think there were 2 different crews, and I don't actually remember if I was there for 4 days or however days I was there for. I think I was there for 4 days. But basically, every day we would get up, get up, not necessarily that early if we had stayed up really late the night before, but we would get up. We brought all our own food, all our own cookware. For a period of time, we even brought all our own water because we had pretty good water at our farm. So we would bring all our stuff with us, including what we called our ammo, which was the stuff that we sold, the CDs, bumper stickers, magazines and stuff. And so in the morning, we would be on the operation of cooking the food, preparing for the day, and so on. And then by late morning, usually, we would be out in the street. So in New Orleans, that meant a whole bunch of us descending on the French Quarter and just, from maybe 11 a.m. to 2 a.m., 3 a.m., whatever. Just the term we used was hitting up, a very 60s term, but hitting up strangers with our magazine, like, hey, have you seen this? Or the music, or the Stop Bitching, Start a Revolution t-shirt or sticker, constantly doing this for hours and hours and hours, of course, with breaks to eat and so on, but just a very relentless pace. And then, go to bed at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., get up the next morning, usually underslept and still a little bit exhausted, and go out and do it again. And so there was this relentless pace, and it could be very challenging. I certainly had tons of challenges as a seller. And at the same time, there could be an ecstatic quality to the experience, partly just the contact high. We had this term getting on, in quotes. So, and I certainly experienced that. I experienced going out in the street and maybe having a little bit of a hard time getting into it, and then getting to a point where I felt like I was having a good time. I felt magnetic. Everybody I talked to wanted to talk to me. I think that had to do, to a degree, I think, with connection to the people I was selling with, just feeling like we were a bunch of badasses and we were kicking butt. And I think it also, though, had to do with tapping into some fundamental human yearning to create a better world, and to believe that what we imagine we can create. One of the lines we used in the street was like, we all want the same things. Not necessarily, there's some nuances to that and ways in which that is not true. But I think there were times when I did tap into that, like, in a sense, we do all want this. We want love and connection and health and well-being and excitement and joy and all those things. And so there was a way that Zendik selling, even with the, coercive and exhausting aspects of it, there was a way that it really did kind of allow me to tap into this undercurrent of ecstasy, which I still appreciate having access to this day.
It kind of sounds like a dopamine hit. Like whenever you would make that connection with someone, you probably had some chemicals inside of you that were released that gave you a boost of confidence, or, hey, that person actually listened to me, or, they understand what I'm saying. It's a connection. Yes. And, we all know that dopamine hits, we all crave them. So, it makes sense. Yeah. I did have one question that came up while you were talking about that. I'm assuming you guys didn't have any permits to do any selling.
We never, ever, ever had permits to do selling. We did all kinds of illegal stuff. We would make fake passes for ourselves to get into music festivals. We would just, sneak through gates. We would be out on the street in the city. Like one of my very last selling trips in Virginia Beach, Virginia, we were out with our Stop Bitching bumper stickers, and a few of us were told, were told multiple times by the police, number one, it's illegal to have public profanity in Virginia Beach, maybe the whole state of Virginia. And also, of course, it's illegal to solicit and sell on the street. So we were told multiple times. I mean, I think I was told at least once, like, we're warning you now. If we catch you again, we will arrest you. And occasionally Zendiks did get arrested. But we were certainly guerrillas, and we just did what we wanted. And we did not really care about the rules.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
You were on a mission, right? You were on a mission, and it didn't matter what the rules were. That tracks.
Mm-hmm.
One of the unique things about the farm was the group's approach to dating and engaging in sexual activity with one another. Could you tell us more about what their philosophy was?
Yeah. So going along with the death culture theme, the part of the Zendik philosophy on sex and relationships was that how we had all learned to do it was corrupt and dishonest, and we needed to learn a new way. So Errol and Wolf, the two founders of the farm, Wolf died before I arrived, Errol was still around. The story was that they were the first couple in history to have a truly honest relationship. And so if any of us wanted that for ourselves, we had to apprentice to their example, and to Errol in particular, who was still alive. So, and a corollary of that was that none of us could trust ourselves in terms of our own romantic longings or relationship desires. And that related to pretty tight control over mating behavior. When I first arrived at the farm, I was a virgin. I was, in terms of sex and relationships, entirely clueless. And I was told, very early on, that how it worked at the farm at that time was that if you were interested in someone, then you would talk to one of the dating straters, which was short for administrator, and they would, quote, hit the other person up for you, ask the other person if they wanted to go on a walk, which was a euphemism for just hanging out, making out, getting to know each other, or a date, which meant going to a date space, which was a tiny shack, big enough for a double bed and a nightstand, and actually having sex, getting naked and having sex. So when I first arrived and I learned about this process, I actually thought it was great, because I had such a hard time on my own. I was like, great, here, there's help available. And also here, sex and relationships get to be out in the open. It doesn't have to be something like that I keep to myself and, am and ashamed about, which is part of how I grew up. So at first I thought it was like amazing and liberating. And as time went on, I engaged in various relationships with, various men I fell in love with. And the pattern was that, maybe after a few months of being with a guy, I would receive some pronouncement from above, either from Errol or her daughter or the group as a whole, saying my relationship was corrupt, it was screwing with the revolution, and I had to either fix it or get out of it. And this wasn't just me. This was a common pattern, which is related to the fact that part of a cult leader's power comes out of keeping the strongest allegiance of any individual in the group for herself. So in the same way that Errol would take children away from their parents to lessen the strength to weaken that relationship and keep both the child's and the parent's primary relationship to her, she would also break up couples for the same reason. So yeah, there was both, I would say, how sex and relationships were structured at Zendik in some ways created opportunity for a lot of exploration, maybe, that wouldn't have been possible in other situations. And at the same time, that freedom only went so far. And once you were on the road to attachment or had become attached, watch out.
Right. I can't remember, how old was Errol at the time when you were there?
Let's see. Well, she was born in 1938 and I got there in 99. So she would have been 61.
So then her daughter Swan was probably in her 30s at that point.
Yeah, maybe. Her daughter is actually only 6 months older than I am. So she would have been, I guess, I was 22. She would have been 23 at the time that I arrived.
Okay. So you arrived at Zendik Farm in the fall of 1999. You say in your book that you began admitting that you had joined a cult in 2005. What helped you come to that realization?
Right. So I left in 2004. And at the time I left, I was still a true believer. I didn't leave because I realized it was a cult and wanted to get out. I mean, I think there were cracks in my allegiance, like semi-conscious cracks in my allegiance, things that had started to not seem right to me, and also kind of a basic loss of heart. I wanted to love being there and I wanted to be super enthusiastic, but I wasn't. Still, though, I did believe in it. I believed in outside world of death culture and that there was nothing there for me. And I left as a result of a meeting that Errol asked the group to hold to decide what to do with me. Whenever she advised people to hold that kind of meeting, we knew what the message was. It was, tell this person to leave. But she didn't want to do it herself. So I was told to leave. And before hearing this pronouncement, I was thinking, if they do tell me to leave, I will beg for another chance. But when I received the pronouncement, when someone said to me, we think you should leave, I said, I think you're right. Just in that moment, I think I acknowledged, yes, even though this seems disastrous and like doom and the worst thing that could happen, I can't fight it. And I think like 1% of me was like what was excited by my freedom. And the other 99% thought I was doomed. So I left. I received $10 and arrived at the highway in the middle of nowhere, West Virginia, where the group had moved by then from Western North Carolina. And I just started hitchhiking. And so basically, I would say what happened in the next year or so between physically departing Zendik and mentally, emotionally freeing myself, one major thing that happened was that I was out in the quote death culture, and I was 100% dependent on non-Zendiks for my well-being, for my friendships, for my connection, and for connection and survival. And so many people were so damn good to me. And so I kept receiving evidence like that countered the Zendik story. And I fell in love with this truck driver who gave me a ride across the country and started forming other attachments. So, and also just started making my way in the world. And I got a driver's license and I got my passport. I traveled around the world. I started doing things for myself that I wanted to do. Still, though, after I had traveled all the way around the world, I came back to New York City, to Brooklyn, where I am from. Still, I thought that I would be doomed if I did not return to Zendik. And yet I could not bring myself to call the farm and beg for another chance. I just couldn't do it because at that time I had gotten used to being treated with respect. And I knew I wouldn't get that if I called the farm. And I simply didn't want to. So because I thought I was finally clear to make that call, but I couldn't and wouldn't do it, then that started me on kind of a deeper level of soul searching and actually asking why. Around that time too, I encountered via the internet someone who had lived at Zendik many, many years before me. She wasn't a total critic of Zendik. Like, she respected Zendik in a lot of ways, but she did have some criticisms of it. And because she wasn't a Zendik hater, I was able to talk with her and trust her. And she asked me at one point to just write down everything I hated about living in Zendik. And it was a safe enough space that I could do that. So I started admitting to myself, yeah, it was not amazing. That there were a lot of things that were really, really hard for me. That happened. Just writing honestly to myself for the first time, and also getting this, just receiving this idea from a book that I read that whenever you're told there are only two choices, it's wrong. It's not true. Like, and I had been thinking my only two choices were to stay out in the death culture and just feel doomed forever, or, bury my self-respect and grovel for another chance at the farm. And those were both horrible options. So just getting the idea that there could actually be something entirely different. There could be a third way. That was helpful in opening my mind. But the sort of pivotal moment happened in, I think it was the very beginning of December 2005, about 14 months after I physically left the farm. And a friend of mine who had left maybe 6 months after I had, she was on her way from California to Paris. She stopped in New York where I was. We got together. I had been thinking that because she'd always been a better seller than me, that she would have an easier time of rehabilitating herself and getting back to the farm. And my burning question for her was, are you going back? Like, I may have assumed the answer was going to be yes, but I asked her that and she was like, Helen, can I be honest with you? I was like, of course, I wouldn't want anything else. And she said, I am never going back. I was like, oh, really? You're not going back? And I think that you're purer than I am. And, she was like, yeah, it's not that we were screwed up people. It was a screwed up place. So she had gotten the cult memo before me and read this book, Combating Cult Mind Control, which she recommended to me. But the book was very helpful. The whole time I was reading the book, I was like, yes, Zendik fits a pattern. It's not a revolution. It's not new. It's not different. It's not, it's not that. It follows a very old pattern. But simply in my conversation with my friend, the sort of basic, together we were retelling our Zendik story with this basic change in premise, from, we didn't make it there because we were too steeped in the death culture, to why would we want to make it there? And how could it even have been possible for anyone to make it there, especially in terms of a romantic relationship? Errol had been with Wolf in a kind of tumultuous way, but they had been together for whatever it was, 40 years until he died. And then she took up with a much younger man after Wolf's death, and they were together and they were monogamous for a number of years. And my friend pointed out to me, she was like, yeah, and if Errol and her boyfriend had faced the kind of pressure that the rest of us faced, do you think they would have survived? These are very simple and obvious things. But when you spend all these years trapped inside a story with a whole bunch of other people who believe it as absolutely as you do, some things that seem very simple and obvious in hindsight do not.
Right.
Are not simple and obvious at all.
So when did you decide to put your story down on paper in a memoir?
So I decided to write the story. It was probably within about a month of having that conversation with my friend. I was just so gobsmacked by what I saw as twin miracles. The first miracle was that I had escaped, and when I had this conversation with my friend, this watershed conversation, I felt so free and so light and so joyful, and this renewed sense of I get to live in the world and love the people I love. And that felt amazing and miraculous to me. And then the other thing that kind of dumbfounded me was this experience of having lived inside a story, like having created this fantasy world, that was so very real to me and all the people I lived with. And I knew that if I were just to have a conversation with someone or write an essay about it, I would not be able to convey the totality of this experience. And I had always been a writer, just sort of a frustrated, constipated one. And so that was my natural go-to. I was like, I'm going to write about this. And so I signed up for a memoir class, I think in January of 2006, and just started drafting. And then it took 12 years to actually publish it.
And then, by the way, I think your title, Mating in Captivity, is brilliant. Like there's so many things you can take away from that title, but I love it. So you published it through She Writes Press, which is a hybrid publisher. Can you tell us more about what that experience was like?
Yeah. So I will start with my journey to She Writes, which is kind of interesting. So, of course, when I first embarked on the project, I had dreams of a hotshot agent and Big Five publisher and all that. And I had contact with various agents over the years through referrals. I did a whole lot of querying and got, decent responses, people requesting the manuscript and so on. But I didn't find an agent. And then I started entering contests and applying to small publishers and all this stuff. And at a certain point, I started to feel really dispirited. Like I didn't like the dynamics of the relationship that I was part of. Like this dynamic of I'm scratching at your door trying to get you to give me something. It started to feel really bad to me. And I don't actually know how I heard about She Writes, but I think I had entered this yet another writing contest where the prize is book publication. And I had also heard about She Writes and was thinking about going that route. And I found myself kind of hoping I was not going to win this contest. Well, no problem. I did not win the contest, but there was a moment when I switched from wanting someone else to do it for me to truly deeply desiring this other partnership model where I'm driving the bus. And so I think it was late 2016, I applied to publish with She Writes Press, and they vet the manuscripts. I think it was like the first 40 pages or so. They will read the first part of your manuscript, give you feedback, tell you if it's basically ready to go, if you need significant developmental editing, whatever. So they told me mine was basically ready to go. I still did hire a copy editor through She Writes, which was extremely helpful. And then in 2017, I ran a Kickstarter campaign to raise money to cover the cost of publication, which was, both nightmarish and amazing at the same time. Certainly dark nights of the soul, coming up during that process, but also empowering. Like, stepping out there and saying, I have this book, I want to publish it, I am looking for support. And so publishing with She Writes. So they do curate their list. It's not a vanity publisher. It's not like anybody can just, hand in their manuscript and get published.
They only accept a certain number of books a year, right?
Yes. It's actually a pretty small number. And it's just become more and more popular every year. So probably the process is getting more and more selective each year. So the deal is that the author pays the cost of publication. The author also gets a larger share of the royalties. And one of the major advantages of She Writes versus self-publishing is that they have traditional distribution. Most recently with Simon & Schuster, which means it's super easy for any bookstore to get a hold of your book and if a customer special orders it or just to have it on their shelves. It's a seamless process for that. And it's also super easy for libraries to order it, which is very important to me because I, spent my childhood in the library and still love libraries dearly. So basically, it's called hybrid publishing. It's also called partnership publishing. And as an author with a partnership publisher, the publisher is providing the distribution and the know-how and the printing and like the process of getting the book through all the channels it needs to go to. I was my own marketing department and my own publicity department. And there were times when I had, poor me fits and like, oh, if only I were at Random House, with the publicist getting me on 40 different radio shows in a day. Sure, I went through that. But also on the tail end of the experience, I am so grateful that I did have to do it all myself because I learned so much. I learned that I can't take any of that for granted. And if I should happen to sign on with a corporate, I call them corporate, not traditional publishers, a corporate publisher for a later book, and I do get the advantage of a publicist who can just call a radio station to get me on, I will be extremely grateful and I will understand what a blessing that is. But I understand now, I understand what a publisher can do for you and what a publisher can't do for you. And that has been a great blessing of the hybrid experience.
Yeah. Memoirs in particular, from what I understand, are extremely difficult to sell to the Big Five publishers. I mean, you basically have to be a celebrity. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
It's tough, and I've been through the same thing. It's so funny. I'm sitting here listening to your story. I have this novel I'm trying to get an agent for, and I've had some nibbles, which I've never had before because this isn't the first book I've written. But in the end, they keep coming back and saying, no, it's just not for me, or I'm going to pass, but I can't wait to see who picks it up and things like that. And I'm getting more and more discouraged by the day and trying to figure out if, well, maybe I should just take this on myself.
Yeah.
It may be time.
Another thing about publishing that it's very useful to remember is that it's a business, and agents and editors are business people. And when an agent says to you, I love your book, but I don't know how I would sell it, which is what the agent said to me who came closest, to being interested in my book. That's real. That's true. It is their job to find a market, to understand how they're going to make money on this project, just like if they were selling a widget. And if they don't have a vision for it, they're doing you a favor by saying no. But I think the problem is getting business propositions mixed up with quality considerations. There are two different things.
Right. Yeah. And then also, I've come to understand, agents can only select a certain amount of new projects. And if they already have a writer that has written some sort of suspense novel that's very similar or writes that same kind of novel, they can't have these two authors competing against each other. Yeah. So it may just be that their book list is just very narrow. So, it's hard, but I admire that you took it, upon yourself. And I've heard great things about She Writes Press. I've looked into them myself. They have some great contests. I think they have an annual one that they do now where you can submit, I think, the full manuscript. So I encourage people to check them out. So what I am interested to know is, what is your life like today?
Well, I think of myself as being towards the beginning of a second cycle. So I moved to Western North Carolina from New York in 1999 to live at Zendik Farm. 25 years later, in 2024, I moved again from New York to Western North Carolina, which is where I am now. But this time, not to join a cult, but to join a healthy, intentional community called Earth Haven Eco Village, which is in Black Mountain. I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere, but that's its technical location. And I feel like the two experiences are intimately intertwined. I would never have found Earth Haven if not for people I knew at Zendik. The two sites are only about an hour's drive away from each other. And I also would not have developed the appreciation I have now for what it takes for people to live together in a healthy way if I had not been so intimately exposed to all the terrible things that can go wrong. So I live in this place, and out my window there are fields and gardens and forests and sheep and cows. And I don't drive. I grew up in Brooklyn. I did learn to drive at some point, and I have a license, but I don't deserve it, and I will not do that.
At least you admit it.
Yeah, probably ever again. I walk 6 miles a day. I have a quota. I have been doing that for about more than 20 years, and it's super healthy for me, just mentally, emotionally, and physically. And I write usually for 3 hours every day, working on my novel, which is going into my 6th year on that project. And I invest a lot in my web of relationships here in this village. There's about maybe 110, 115 people who live here, adults and children. We govern ourselves. The community's been around for 30 years, so there is a lot of wisdom and knowledge and expertise here around relationships and governance and how to live together and innovate together and so on. And so I feel very well socially nourished here. That's part of why I came here. I had been living in a tiny city in upstate New York in a single family house with my husband, whom I do love very much. And also I just felt super lonely most of the time. Like I mean, sure, I had friends, but I didn't have many opportunities for collaboration. And I have very rarely had like a regular job where I have sort of workplace camaraderie. So here I feel it's so interesting. Like one time, so at Earth Haven, Zendik was a dictatorship basically. Earth Haven, there's the first building to be built was the council hall, which is round, and it's where council happens, which is a modified consensus-based decision making process where people who have earned full membership in the community through a clear process, that people can choose to go through, get together and make decisions, for the sake of the community.
And nobody's controlling anybody's relationships with anybody else.
Exactly. Yeah. The same council, I needed to explain what council was because I was referring to something that happened there. Mm. I heard someone say, we're creating a new culture. And I was like, oh my gosh, we used to say that at Zendik all the time. So I'm hearing this same phrase, but it means something entirely different. And we don't have delusions of grandeur here. We don't think we're magically going to save anybody or anything. And at the same time, there is a devotion to experimenting with how we live together and our relationship with our land and each other. And so I really feel like I've come back full circle. Not full, like full spiral, maybe. And also, I remember one of the things that was really awesome about living at Zendik was it kind of was a village. It was like 116 acres of land and a bunch of different buildings. And we did a lot of, things for ourselves and each other, and wood shop and mechanic shop and carpentry shop and so on and so on. There's just a lot of interdependence. And, if I wanted the legs on my bed shortened, I knew who to ask for that. And this web of relationships created from just constantly in person, helping each other do things and collaborating. And that was something I really did love about Zendik, that in a way I think was the most revolutionary thing about it. And it was a very humble thing. And it really, I think, mattered. And here, that's what's happening too. Just without the bullshit.
Well, I love Black Mountain. I love that area. Uh-huh. And I was thinking earlier, it's so funny. I was in Asheville in 99, 2000, working in downtown. And I had to have crossed paths with some Zendiks at some point. And I just don't know if I did.
We did go to Asheville, not super regularly because we didn't want to wear out our welcome, but usually Friday nights. Maybe there was a First Friday something going on. Friday night was the most common time we would go to Asheville to sell, and we would be in the area around Pack Square during the sort of nightlife area at night, and then I think on Haywood Street during the day, and then we also went to Belshare.
Yeah, which is no more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it started getting a little too crazy. But it was great in its heyday. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious, how did you guys fare during the hurricane when Helene hit? Because I know there's still a lot of damage in the town from that there. I was visiting there a couple of months ago, and it was really heartbreaking.
Yeah. So at Earth Haven, there was one building that's currently uninhabited that did sustain some significant damage. Other than that, I think partly because of the choices the founders made about where to site the buildings were fine. Our main road in some places became a river. We had serious damage to our bridges. There's a road, a paved road that's about 1.25 miles long that goes up to the 2-lane road. There were so many trees down on that road, and the roads that it intersected with. So, but it didn't take long for all those trees to be cleared away. Like the day, excuse me. So the 27th, by maybe late morning, the winds and rains had subsided. By like 6 p.m. that day, Camp Elliott Road was clear because a bunch of people from Earthhaven went out with their chainsaws and just
took care of it.
Yeah, took care of it. And one of my housemates at the time, he in talking about the clearing of the main road, he's like, "Yeah, hippies and rednecks, together we can do anything." And that road got cleared pretty quickly. But also, maybe the bigger story as far as Earthhaven and Helene was just that 30 years of building, tending, and weaving relationships created this really dense social fabric and a lot of trust amongst all of us, and also really excellent administrative coordinating capability. We were pretty much immediately creating systems. Like, first we figured out, like, okay, we need the internet. How do we get the internet? And then taking inventory of food supplies and who has what, and coordinating trips to town and coordinating trips to get gasoline and propane. So just like tons of cooperation, and it was really a testament to all these years of building relationships.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And it's kind of a test. Like, we have this natural disaster. Can we survive this? And it sounds like you did great. So
yeah,
it was tough. Well, I think that's all the questions I had for you. I really appreciate our discussion and your openness and honesty and sharing this with people so that hopefully they don't get caught up in something like Zendik Farm. But also, I will say, I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a minute. I get so angry when I'm talking to someone about a cult and they go, well, why didn't that person just leave? I mean, why did they do that? Because the leader told them to do that. They don't understand that you don't just walk in somewhere and 5 minutes later, a leader tells you to do something you're uncomfortable with. Right. It takes years, months, a lot of levels of control and brainwashing. And also, like someone I think that was in Nexium said, no one joins a cult.
Exactly.
They join a good thing. Mm-hmm. They don't join a cult. So, thank you for sharing your story and letting everyone know. It can happen to very intelligent people, by the way. Yeah. And there is a way to find yourself again.
Absolutely. And I mean, probably my number one takeaway from my cult experience is I am fine with the fact that it happened, and not because of the thing itself. Like, I could have left Zendik, stayed gone, and remained emotionally paralyzed for the rest of my life. But I chose to compost that experience and keep turning the pile of stinky guck that I had come away with until it became a pile of fertile soil. And so I have learned so much. I mean, there are things I learned actually at the farm. I learned plenty when I was there, but after the fact, just from like turning and facing and composting the experience, it has become a source of incredible value for me. And I do have, I do have minor regrets about things that I did, choices I made when I was there, that and how they impacted other people. But I don't regret the experience. And I think that is actually, rather than cautioning people, don't do this, sure, go and learn about the patterns and learn the questions that you might want to ask when you get involved in a tight-knit group or an intimate relationship that might feel kind of strange to you. But also, don't beat yourself up. We're all constantly being supplied with new piles of compostable material, and it's up to us what we do with it.
That's great. I love that. All right. Well, thanks again, Helen, for joining us.
Welcome. Yeah, thank you.
This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. I'd like to thank Helen Zuman once again for sharing her story with us and recommend that you check out her memoir, Mating in Captivity. I'll post a link in the show notes. Helen is a beautiful writer, and she goes much deeper into her experience with Zendik in the book, so if you want to learn more, you can pick up a copy for yourself. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd also like to support the show in a small way, you can buy me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com, Renee Robertson. Thank you so much for those who have already supported me through this platform. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. Sound editing is provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.